My name is Dolores. I'm sitting at my sister's wedding reception, still a bit dazed from what just happened. The room had been filled with the soft hum of chatter and the clinking of glasses when the host stepped up to the microphone. We'd like to extend a special acknowledgement, his voice boomed across the room, to the owner of Rivera Event Company, whose generosity made tonight's pricing possible for the family. If you'd like to show your appreciation, please join me in recognizing Dolores Rivera. The moment those words left his mouth, the room went dead silent. I watched as my mother's hand, holding a glass of champagne, froze halfway to her lips. Her face, which had been so animated just moments ago, seemed to crumble right before my eyes. It was as if a hidden foundation beneath her had given way. My father, who had been sitting upright, suddenly turned in his seat. His expression wasn't one of pride or even surprise. It was the look of a man who had just realized he'd been making a costly error for far too long. I took a deep breath, smoothed down the dress I'd bought on a tight budget, and walked towards the front of the room. It was a familiar walk, one I'd taken through my entire adult life without anyone paving the way for me. The host extended his hand, and I shook it firmly. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, coming from people who had no idea about the humiliation I'd faced just a short while ago at the entrance. As I stood there, I couldn't help but let my mind drift back to earlier that day. I'd driven 5 hours from my city to be here for my sister's big day. I'd splurged on a dress that I really couldn't afford, practicing a smile in the rearview mirror all the way. I knew that whenever our family got together, something was bound to go wrong. When I arrived at the beautifully decorated venue, the flowers were in full bloom, the lighting was a warm, golden glow, and the tables were dressed in elegant white linen. Soft music filled the air, creating an almost magical atmosphere. But as soon as I stepped inside, I saw my parents. My mother, always the socialite, gave me that wide, fake smile she reserved for public events. She waved me over, and I made my way towards them. My father had his arm around a man I didn't recognize, and beside him stood a woman in a sleek black dress. I assumed she was part of my sister's new in-laws. My mother motioned for me to come closer. I smoothed my dress and plastered on the smile I'd practiced so hard. "This is our other daughter," my mother said, and there was a strange tone in her voice, a slight hesitation, as if she was already distancing herself from me. "Dolores." She paused, making it very obvious. "She works at a local diner." That was it. No mention of the fact that I'd put myself through college at night, juggling classes with my job at the diner. No mention of how I'd started Rivera Event Company from scratch when I was 25. I'd spent the first few years working long hours at the diner during the day and handling event logistics at night. I'd coordinated countless small parties and corporate events on weekends, learning every aspect of the industry while getting maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. The woman in the black dress gave a polite laugh, and her husband smiled awkwardly, not sure if it was a joke. My father just nodded, as if that one-sentence introduction was all I was worth. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I forced myself to keep smiling. I'd become a master at hiding my true feelings. I stepped back and found a glass of water at a nearby table. I stood there, watching as the room filled with guests. My sister, looking like a princess in her wedding gown, floated by. She caught my eye and gave me that apologetic look, the same one I'd seen so many times before. It was a look full of sympathy but also wrapped in silence. She knew what our parents had said, but she wasn't going to say anything. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. I have to admit that. When my sister walked down the aisle, I felt a genuine warmth in my chest. It was a moment that was completely untouched by the earlier humiliation. I clapped and even teared up a little. When my sister started planning her wedding, I'd quietly reached out to the venue coordinator. I'd used my connections and influence to arrange a significant reduction in the family's booking cost. It was my way of showing my love and support, but I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want their approval or acknowledgement because I knew they'd never given it freely. After the host finished speaking and released the microphone, I returned to my seat. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. She didn't say a word at first. The woman in the black dress was watching from across the room, her expression completely different from before. My father cleared his throat a couple of times before he finally managed to say something. His words were weak, something about not realizing and being proud. But it was too little, too late. I listened and nodded. I wasn't ready to forgive them just yet, but I also wasn't going to shut them out completely. I sat there, in that carefully chosen dress, at a wedding I'd secretly helped make possible. And I knew that the life I'd built in silence was finally speaking at full volume. No one will ever introduce me as just the diner girl again. They don't get the chance. If this story has touched you, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, then you're exactly who this channel was created for. Subscribe right now. Every week, we bring you real stories about real people who have been written off but refuse to stay that way. Hit that subscribe button and never miss a thing.